Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the RD podcast. I'm your host, Space Ranger Daniel, and I'm very excited to welcome you to the first episode of this podcast. So, I was thinking, what really is going to be the topic of this podcast, and it really is going to be just a random assortment of things that I find interesting, whether it be sports related, to educational, to more entertainment, kind of all over the place. And one of the first things I want to get out of the way before we start is that there is going to be some stumbling and bumbling in the words as in these first few episodes as I kind of get my groove and figure out how to properly be a podcast person. So bear with me for these first couple episodes, but obviously I am extremely thankful for you taking the time to listen in on these podcasts for whatever amount of time. So I was thinking about what this first episode is going to be about, and I decided to make it about sports and specifically the Kansas Jayhawks basketball team. Sorry about that, just moving around in my chair. So we're a big Jayhawks fan in this household, and I wanted to make a video about, or a episode rather, about the era in which I think Kansas basketball peaked. Now that might seem a bit odd of a statement to make because Kansas is a blue blood. They've been good for about as long as anyone can remember. So how can you pick a time frame when you think they peaked? Well, in today's episode, we're going to explore an 8-year span from the years 2015 to 2023 where I think the team was the most successful. They were the most successful in March Madness, in the regular season, where they really did have a hold on the Big 12 that has sort of since fizzled away, as today the team is struggling to go deep in March and is kind of definitely towards the top of the Big 12, but when comparing to teams like Arizona, Houston, and Iowa State, they're not as dominant as they were just 10 years ago. So we start off with the 2015-2016 season, where the team went 33-5 and finished in the Elite Eight. So they had ranked wins over number 19 Vanderbilt, number 2 Oklahoma, number 23 Baylor, number 20 Kentucky, number 10 WVU, and number 3 Oklahoma in the second time they played. And they had season sweeps of both Baylor and Oklahoma. So they had a 14-game win streak, including the championship win in the Big 12 tournament, and they were a number 1 seed and lost to Villanova in the Elite Eight. So already starting off really quite good. Moving on to 2016 and 2017, the team finished 31-5 and they made it to the Elite Eight for their second straight season. They had ranked wins over number 1 Duke, number 14 Kentucky, number 12 Baylor, number 9 WVU, and number 4 Baylor. And this was the second season in a row where there was a season sweep of Baylor, and they had back-to-back top 5 wins in Kentucky and Baylor. So unlike last year, they did have a lackluster performance in the Big 12 tournament as they lost to the 8th-seeded TCU in the quarterfinals, I believe. But they did advance to the Elite Eight, as I mentioned before, so it really didn't end up mattering, and only to lose to 8th-seeded Oregon. So in that year, the 8th seed was Kansas's kryptonite. Moving on to 2017 and 2018, so they were 27-8. However, 15 of those wins were vacated for recruitment violations, and this was really quite disappointing and unfortunate for Kansas because this was a fantastic season. For one thing, they had ranked wins over number 7 Kentucky, number 16 TCU, number 6 West Virginia, and a ranked Texas Tech team. In my notes, I don't have what Texas Tech was ranked, so just know that Texas Tech was ranked, but I don't know what their specific rank was. And they had a season sweep of WVU. So we're starting to see a bit of a theme of Kansas being very dominant against ranked Baylor and West Virginia teams. So they were weaker than the last 2 seasons in terms of pure record even before the vacated wins, as they lost to an unranked Baylor, and half the games they lost were to unranked teams. Let me change my paper here. However, they were on fire from there on out. They won the Big 12 championship, defeating WVU for the third time that season, and they made it all the way to the Final Four. However, this was, as I mentioned, this Final Four run was also vacated, and the Big 12 championship. So moving on to 2018 to 2019, they were 26-10, and they were eliminated in the second round to Auburn. So a definitely big step back for the Jayhawks. However, they did have ranked wins over number 10 Michigan State in their season opener, number 5 Tennessee, number 17 Villanova, number 23 Oklahoma, number 25 TCU, number 24 Iowa State, and number 16 Texas Tech, as well as number 16 Kansas, and also number 16 Kansas State, as it was different points of the season. This was the third time in 4 years where they had a season sweep of Baylor, and this was a pretty brutal schedule. They had 10 ranked games, multiple points of back-to-back ranked games. So the 26-10 record is, and the fact that they were eliminated in the second round, is sort of misleading to how well the team did that season. And it's also worth noting that in that year, Auburn did end up going to the Final Four. So it's not like they lost to a team that ended up getting crushed in the very next round. So they did advance to the Big 12 championship, where they would lose to Iowa State. And overall, this was a disappointing year by Kansas standards, but it was still quite good in terms of ranked wins and the fact that they made it all the way to the Big 12 championship. So 2018, as I mentioned, is a disappointing year, but it will be a good motivation for what will be considered one of Kansas's best years under Bill Self, which was the 2019-2020 season, where the team finished 28-3, and they were the number one overall seed. They had ranked wins over number 20 Colorado, number 16 West Virginia, number 14 West Virginia, and number 1 Baylor. So these were less ranked wins than usual. They still swept the season series against the top 15 West Virginia, and in 2 of their 3 losses, they only lost by 1 score. I believe they lost to Duke that season. I'm not sure. I would have to check my, I'd have to look that up to make sure. So COVID-19 would cancel the remaining schedule, leaving Kansas as the regular season Big 12 champion. And many people have argued people have argued that Kansas that year was the national champion. As what we're gonna see, this season really does hurt Bill Self's overall resume, because had Kansas won the national championship that year, it would have been his third. Well, it technically would have been his second at the time, third overall, and he would have had 2 rings in the span of 3 years. So this season definitely, and the fact that it was canceled, does hurt Self's record quite a bit, his resume. But it's also important to remember that Kansas wasn't a shoo-in to win the national championship. You know, anything can happen in March. So 2020, 2021, and I want to preface this by saying that 2021 was really the year that I first got into college basketball. So we're going to spend a little bit more time on this just because I'm more knowledgeable on it, and a lot of this stuff I didn't really have to research, I just kind of knew. So keep that in mind as we get into this next part. So Kansas was ranked to start the year at number 6, and in their season opener against number 1 Gonzaga, they did lose. However, they ended up having a really nice run where they had ranked wins against number 20 Kentucky, number 14 Texas Tech, and number 7 West Virginia before getting crushed by number 18 Texas at Allen Fieldhouse. Sorry about that. And this game would somewhat knock them off their swivel a bit, as they would end up losing 4 of their next 6 games. 2 of those losses were to unranked teams in Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. And then eventually they lost to West Virginia in sort of a rout, and this would be knocking them out of the top 25 for the first time since 2009. So Kansas would rebound their very next game with a ranked win over the Oklahoma State-led Cade Cunningham, and Oklahoma State was ranked at the time of that game. And they would also beat number 15 Texas Tech before dominating the then undefeated number 2 Baylor Bears in a game that Kansas really kicked butt on the glass. At 71-58 was the final score, and ultimately Kansas would withdraw from the Big 12 tournament due to positive COVID-19 tests after a win against number 25 Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship, or the Big 12 tournament. So this would have been the second round, And really, when they got into March Madness, they did not play well at all. They barely scraped by against the number 14 seeded Eastern Washington before getting absolutely destroyed by number 6 USC, and Kansas was the number 3 seed. So this season was definitely very up and down, but that's emblematic of the COVID year, right? Where like teams would lose a lot more because again, like this was only a year removed from them going 28-3 and being the number 1 overall seed to having 10 losses. It was either 9 or 10, and really like losing multiple games in complete routes. So it was very much was a bit of a bungee cord, but Kansas still did show a lot of that elite play whenever they beat teams like Baylor, West Virginia for the first time, and they put up a pretty decent fight against Gonzaga. So moving on to 2021 and 2022 that year, this would be the championship year. We've been building up to it, but it's finally here. So Kansas would finish 34-6, and they started off actually pretty rough. They lost to an unranked Dayton, dropping the Jayhawks to number 8, but rebounded with wins over number 13 Texas Tech, number 20 Iowa State, number 8 Baylor, and finished the regular season with a win over number 21 Texas. They won the Big 12 tournament and would go on to win Bill Self his second championship in March Madness with the largest finals comeback ever against North Carolina, who was actually finishing up what will be a very good Cinderella run for them. So in 2022 and 2023, Kansas would finish 28-8, and there were very high expectations, obviously. They would have ranked wins over number 17 Duke, number 14 Indiana, which they actually crushed them in that game, number 14 Iowa State, number 7 Kansas State, number 5 Texas, and finished the regular season again Big 12 champions. So they lost in the Big 12 final versus Texas, and they would be a number 1 seed but lost in the second round. So really, the context before this peak, and I know we're talking about this at the end of today's episode, but Kansas was amazing in the years leading up to this run, at least during the regular season, but the team had suffered many early exits, most of them in the round of 32, and in fact, the last time Kansas had made it to the Elite 8 or better before 2015 was in the 2011-2012 season when they made it to the championship versus Kentucky. So part of the reason why I think this era was a peak was because there was a national championship, 2 Elite 8 runs, a Final Four run that was vacated, multiple Big 12 championships, domination against West Virginia and Baylor all throughout, and it really just was the era that I think Kansas peaked. I mean, you could say it was you could say maybe it was from 2008 to 2012 when Bill Self won his first championship and when they made the championship for the second time. You could always argue about it, but really, this was the story of the 8 years of Kansas basketball where I think they were at their best. So that's going to wrap up today's episode. I thank you all so much for listening, and I will be with you next week for another episode. Take care. Space Ranger Daniel, out. Cheers.